Quentin, we didn't do the countdown tonight, so we are live as we speak.
Okay.
I, and it hurt. Kaden threw me off a little bit, but we are live, and we're just gonna go ahead and dive down into it, Quentin, and hopefully, folk will have some questions tonight, and they can throw them at her. You prepared to answer some questions over
Sure.
there?
Why not? Why
All
not?
right, I hear you. I hear you. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Show on Urban Cast. I'm Jack. My co-host Damon is not going to be here tonight with us, but we're going to go ahead and drive on home. Today we have a very special guest, Quentin Anthony Anderson, who's running for the 6th Congressional District. The district spans from Shreveport in the north to East and West Baton Rouge down in the south. It peaks over to Opelousas and parts of Lafayette, right?
Yep,
And
that's right.
and you have a lot of farmland in between.
Oh, I see it every day I'm driving through the district. It is as urban as it is rural. It is
Mhm.
it's a little bit of everything.
Yep, yep. Before we dive in, we want to encourage everyone to share. If you're listening to us out there tonight, we definitely would encourage you to share this broadcast and participate by asking questions. You know, we ask those questions over here via the comments. Remember, our main goal is to get everyone, especially our young voters, to get up and get out there and go vote. Your voice matters, folks, and you guys are in control. I definitely want to say that. This old guy say the young guys are in control now. I accept that, Quentin. Let's get started. Quentin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a small business owner. I'm a nonprofit professional. I'm from Baton Rouge. Graduated from McKinley Senior High School, and I know people roll their eyes when they hear those of us McKinley Panthers mention that, but
Uh-huh.
I always like to let people know that it's a little bit of arrogance with a reason. It's the first public high school in Louisiana for Black kids, and so it has a little bit of history.
Kind of like that
Um,
Peabody thing here. I'm sorry to cut you off.
no worries. Um, I'm a Louisiana Tech grad, Bulldog. I got my law degree from LSU, and so my Louisiana pedigree crosses across the entire state.
Mhm.
Um, I'm running for Congress after a career of sort of being in nonprofit advocacy, being on the sidelines, uh, hoping that the people that are in elected office do the right thing,
Mhm.
uh, trying to convince them with arguments and data. And I think one of the things that you learn when you're in that world is that at the end of the day, you can only ask other people to do so much. Their North Star is their North Star. And in lieu of good people running, good, passionate, informed people running for office, oftentimes you'll get, other folks. The seats don't go vacant. It's people that are often bought and paid for by, interests that are sometimes contrary to the constituents that they're supposed to represent. And so, one of the reasons why I think people stopped voting last year, why turnout was so low, is
Mhm.
because there's this sense that no matter who you vote for, Democrat or Republican, that the outcome is going to be the same. And so people were under the impression that their vote didn't matter.
Mhm.
That depressed me, especially at a time when our democracy is so fragile. It's an interactive sport. You have to participate. You can't just sort of hope that a savior is going to come by and save our democracy, save our government. It's going to be us.
Mhm.
And so I think last year was kind of an inflection point for me. I realized that if good people don't step up, uh, you see what the results are. And so I had to practice what I preach. And I wanted to run because I want other people to run. I want just average folks that actually live in the districts that they experience and can represent those perspectives. I want those people to be the people at the tables of power, not just the people that, kind of get the blessing of the existing cool kids table. I want the folks that are closest to the pain to be closest to the power.
And this new district, I'm gonna go off a little bit, but this new district, it was carved out, and it was a lot of back and forth about
Mhm.
the new district and different things of that nature. It's very diverse. You have two large urban centers, north and south, but
Mhm.
different dynamics in both. And then you got these confused people here in central Louisiana. And I don't know what you get over there in Acadiana, over in Opelousas and Lafayette, but what type of a challenge is that going to be to represent a district so wide? And that's the urban part of it. But then you add the dynamics of the rural component of it as well. How, what's your thoughts about representing a district that's so drastically different?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, if I could have drawn the district, it probably would not look like this. Just because if you're from Louisiana, the idea of a district that encompasses North, Central, and South Louisiana is a little counterintuitive.
Mhm.
But as I've traveled the district, and I take pride in the fact that I've actually taken this race seriously. I've actually been
Mhm.
campaigning. I've been knocking on doors. I've been attending community events. I had a brother one day in St. Landry, knocked on his door, and then he showed up at a music festival in West Baton Rouge, and he was like, "Boy, you really making your way across here." Um,
Mhm.
I've enjoyed traveling the district. I've really fallen in love with the district as it is, because you know, one, the uniqueness of it. You get
Mhm.
exposed to the different experiences, the different perspectives, the different industries. There are different industries that dominate different areas, and so uh, being able to learn, being able to listen, and I think that's really the key right there. How
Mhm.
do you represent a place that's so diverse and so varied in the perspectives and backgrounds and interests? Is that you listen. That's the exciting part of this job of being a representative to me. And it sounds, it's a little nerdy, but
Mhm.
I like the idea of not going to Congress for me, but going to Congress for everyone else. That you're a proxy. That's really what your job is as a representative. You represent the interests of the folks that live back home that don't have the luxury to, vote on war resolutions or the budget. They got to go to work, so they're trusting that you're going to represent their interests. So
Right.
part of the campaign process has been listening, and I think
Mhm.
part of the representative process is to always be available and accessible so that people can share their unique perspectives that you may not live with. They're not your shared lived experiences, but they're theirs, and they want you to listen. They want you to be able to represent their interests. So it really is the listening part, being
Mhm.
present, that has made it easy, because I don't have to do a whole lot of talking. People will tell me what matters to them.
Right. Public safety and the crime rates in the larger cities are a major concerns. Um, and here in Central Louisiana, rates well above the national average. How, how do you plan to use your position as representative um, to support our communities from a crime standpoint, specifically when you look at a city like Alexandria, and we're almost one third of our force down. So how will you leverage uh, the position of representative of the 6th Congressional District in Louisiana to help the municipalities try to combat this thing called crime?
Yeah, so I think it starts with recognizing that public safety goes beyond policing,
Hmm.
right? Public safety isn't just limited to how many cops you have on the street. Um, Cops are an important part of public safety, but I think
Hmm.
recognizing what their role is makes it a little bit easier to recognize where the gaps in policy have been.
Hmm.
Uh, what a cop's job is to address crime. They
Hmm.
respond to crime.
Right.
To some degree, they investigate crime, but even there, they hand that off to a prosecutor. They recognize that they are but part of a criminal justice system. They are not the entire system, and yet our expectations have been that law enforcement is responsible for reducing crime and preventing crime, and that is asking a lot of anybody.
Right.
But
Right.
especially with the qualifications that we ask of law enforcement, uh, they're not equipped to address people's economic desperation that leads them to crime. They're not equipped to address people's job insecurity. They're not equipped to address the educational disparities. So, when we talk about public safety, I think part of what I bring to the table is an understanding that it's more comprehensive than just hiring more cops. Are there
Hmm.
places where we need to hire more cops? Sure. Where the need for what cops are supposed to do is not being met. But if your issue is, too many young people are dropping out of school and they're getting caught up in drugs and crime, hiring more cops isn't going to stop them from dropping out of school. And so, we have to be able to have a more comprehensive approach to public safety that sees beyond just, locking them up and throwing away the key. That doesn't do anything beyond just sort of scratching that itch of, making people pay. But if you want to see crime reduced, I mentioned this the last time I was on, you have to address that economic desperation that many people who pursue crime and who engage in crime think that they are living in. And some of them actually are. But even if it's just perception, perception becomes reality. Like I said, when people have nothing to lose, they act like it. And when people have something to lose, they act like it. So if we can create public policy that puts more of the onus on addressing the things that lead people to crime and address like that economic desperation, I think that you're going to see those crime rates go down. But if we keep relying on sort of the old tactics of hire more cops, punish people longer, charge people charge kids as adults, you're just going to get the same old results. Those are the things that we've been doing. Those aren't new tactics. They just feel good. It's the public safety policy equivalent to weaving in and out of traffic during rush hour. Doesn't get you anywhere faster, but it makes you feel like you're moving.
Well, that's interesting that you say that because I heard Chief Murphy Paul of Baton Rouge make the statement once that when, and he said it in this fashion, when we get involved, all other systems have failed. The home, the church, the school, social services, any intervention type of organizations like that. And so often we put a lot of responsibility on our officers out there, and that responsibility shouldn't be there. It's these other systems that are actually, not, for some odd reason, they're not all working together,
Yeah, and it's unfair to the cops too. To
it
have
is
the expectation that they're going to be the silver bullet for our community.
Absolutely. I want to double back. I know we talked to you a little bit about, the legalization of marijuana. You support the federal legalization of marijuana, recognizing it is, importance in reforming our criminal justice system and stimulating economic growth. Can you elaborate a little bit on how you would balance this with states' rights and address legitimate health concerns associated with marijuana use?
Yeah, so I'll work backwards. So on that last one, that's a really good point, and it's one that doesn't really get brought up very much. So I want to be clear. I am in favor of the decriminalization and legalization of marijuana, but I am not encouraging anybody to smoke marijuana. Right? I'm not, I always, I am not the congressional candidate that's gonna, smoke a blunt in the field and do all that. That's not kind of my, that's not my approach. But I think that my position on it is just about the justice element of it, the unfairness of treating marijuana as if it's this scourge of society, and yet alcohol is still legal, things like that. So I think that there's a fairness and justice argument there, that nobody should be in jail, their future shouldn't be ruined because they decide to smoke pot. Especially, I went to LSU Law School. I know for a fact that there are judges and prosecutors and prominent attorneys that were rolling one hell of a blunt during their law school career. So there's a certain hypocrisy there as well. So, and I say all of that to say that there are some very real health concerns. I don't believe that it's a gateway drug, but I do believe, for example, anytime that you're, inhaling smoke, you're increasing, cancer risk.
Right.
There are other anxiety issues and things like that are legitimate to talk about. And you can talk about them while also being in favor of legalization. And I think sometimes we operate in the black and white so often that if there's anything negative about marijuana, then it needs to be illegal. It needs to either be the healthiest drug in the world that has no side effects, or it's the worst, but there's no in between. It's a drug like any other drug, and it has things that people like about it. It has health health risk, and we have to be honest about that as we have the conversation about legalization. We also have to be honest that some people do get addicted to marijuana, not because it's in itself an addictive substance, but it's a substance. It's a substance that alters your thoughts and it inebriates you. Anything like that can be addictive from a psychological perspective. So making sure that, as we talk about legalization, it becomes more normalized. We're also putting in place the structures to make sure that when it gets abused, that there are the systems in place to help people, and that we're also educating people on what marijuana is, because marijuana in 2024 is not marijuana in 1974.
Right.
So making sure that people understand it. How do you balance the sort of federal versus the federal legalization versus the states' rights? I think this is one of those areas where I feel this way on some issues like civil rights. Sometimes I think that federal legislation and federal policy does need to trump state policy, because I think that certain state policy certain things being left up to the states can just create little pockets of discrimination, prejudice, and unfairness. I think weed policy is a good one. There's no good social reason to have people locked up for weed. And I think that is a consensus that is coming to the mainstream at the national level.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have some of these old school sentiments that are being held on to, the fact that you can still, do 10 years for weed possession in some states, there's an inherent unfairness to it, right? There's an inherent unfairness that, in a place like, I don't know, Tennessee or Montana or something like that, that you could get locked up for having a substance that in a neighboring state you'd be perfectly fine. Not only could you be perfectly fine, but they're funding their schools on it.
Yeah.
I think that this is one of those areas where I'd like to see federal law protect those in states that get caught up in their drug laws when they conflict with the federal law. I don't know how to do that because, again, and I heard somebody say this today, and I always disagree. Federal law is not over state law, right? We have a federal system where federal law covers different things than state law does. But trying to figure out how you can utilize federal law to create some degree of fairness for those that get caught up in some antiquated state drug laws would be ideal.
Wow, cool. Can you elaborate a little bit on your plans? You mentioned just a few minutes ago about desperate people.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on your plans to expand employment opportunities, especially for the most marginalized communities? You know, especially with previously incarcerated persons, to help crime at its root, because I think I agree with you when we talk about where some of this crime coming from is stemming from that economic
Mm-hmm.
pocketbook kind of issues. So how would you from a congressional standpoint, I know you're one of the 500 and some odd guys over there, but how would you what would you propose?
Yeah. So, and we talked about this a little bit last time.
Hmm.
I'm a big proponent of, so a couple of things. One is using federal money to support youth jobs programs,
Hmm.
whether it's seasonal or year round.
Hmm.
As I mentioned before, I want to give these young people something to lose. I want to raise the stakes. When you have a good job, when you have consistent money coming in,
Right.
that becomes a real consideration before you engage in some foolishness. And
Hmm.
so, utilizing federal funds to being able to either support existing programs locally or to be able to jumpstart existing programs. I'd like to be able to use the tax code to incentivize employers to hire previously incarcerated folks, and to better incentivize it, and to pay them what they're worth, not to pay them pennies, because again, economic desperation makes recidivism a whole lot more likely. I'd
Hmm.
like to see a lot of these workforce programs that train the previously incarcerated. I'd like to see them embed more digital skills, skills that don't require them to have to go and find an employer. I
Hmm.
think part of the issue, even if you ban the box, is that individual bias can still exist. I want to embed these folks with skills where, as long as they can get access to a laptop, they can start making money right now. They can go to work for themselves. They can get clients who aren't going to ask them if they did time. They're just going to ask them, how good does this flyer look? How good does my website look? How good does this video look? I want to embed them with 21st century skills that make sure that, their employment is not dependent upon somebody's perception of their past. And I think that that's a really big deal. It has saved me plenty of times just having those skills, and so I know it can save other people. Nobody's ever asked for my college degree
Mm-hmm.
when they've contracted me. They've just asked me, to show them my portfolio, the work that I've done.
Right.
I want to expand opportunity zones, which started under Obama, but I want to make it easier for areas that are in economic despair. I want to make it easier for businesses to get access to capital if they commit to investing in those areas. But even beyond that, I want to make access to capital easier for small businesses to become the Intels and the Amazons that we're always hoping will move into these communities and become the economic savior. I want to make it much easier for organic, small, local businesses to get that access so that they can scale, so that they can move into some of the abandoned buildings in downtown Alexandria or in downtown Opelousas or downtown Shreveport. One of the things that I hear all the time is this idea that, you can see in some of these communities, the communities dying. And so I think that some of it does matter that you are showing growth and life and a vision. And so I want to populate these downtowns with local businesses that can hire folks. And again, incentivizing with tax policy to make sure that they're hiring the folks that not only need the jobs, but getting that job could have that value added. That getting that job keeps them off the street, keeps them out of jail. I want to make sure that we're utilizing tax policy not only to incentivize growth, but also to address some of the social goals that we say that we have. It doesn't work for any of us for people to go back to jail. It's in our economic interest for people to get out of jail, develop a skill, and become financially independent and prosperous. And so we have to have tax policy that does that. We incentivize all sorts of other things. We need to also incentivize keeping people out of jail.
That's right. All right. Farming makes up well over half of the area, half of the area of District 6. How do you plan to support our farming community against foreign trade issues? And what steps would you take to lower food costs? I know that's a packed question, but hey, let me hear. We want to hear what you have to say about it.
Well,
you take over in Marksville, where you have quite a few people who are across.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I was just in Marksville this week. I was in Marksville for 2 days this week at the Tunica Biloxi tribes LaRue event out there, and so a lot of farmland. And part of the fun of this race has been learning. I don't come from a farming background. I don't come from an agricultural background, but I always pride myself in being able to say I don't know when I come across an issue that I'm unfamiliar with, and I'm always excited about learning. As it pertains to how to represent the interests of particularly Louisiana farmers, but American farmers, again, in a global market, I think one thing that you can't do is, I'm not a big proponent of tariffs. Tariffs just become tit for tat. We put a tariff on, Chinese imports, and they put a tariff on American imports. And what ends up happening is it just raises the costs of goods for everybody and makes everybody less competitive internationally. I think it benefits us to make sure that there are more markets that are open to what our farmers are selling. I also want to see, and I don't know, I'd have to look more closely into this. I'd also like to see us, again, utilize tax policy to incentivize state governments to buy from in-state farmers and in-state agricultural companies, making sure that your biggest business is home. Your biggest business is, your local school districts, providing agricultural goods for schools and for the jails and things like that. There's a lot of need for it, and I think that the state government could provide a lot of business for many of our local farmers. But I think the biggest thing for me is I am a city boy, right? And so earning the trust of the farming community, being able to be available and listen, recognizing the things that I don't know and being willing to learn, but always keeping my North Star, which is that at the end of the day, I want folks to be individually prosperous, independently prosperous. I want their farms to have business. I don't want them to be dependent on subsidies. I want them to be dependent upon real business that's paying them what they're worth. And it, at the very least, that's the North Star that I go in with. but I also go in completely understanding that I'm a city boy with shiny dress shoes. I got a lot to learn, and this is a district where I am grateful that people have been very patient, including leaders of the farming and agricultural community. And there have been folks that, particularly like LSUA, who have been invaluable in being, ears that I can have access to, and their wealth of experience and expertise. And I intend to continue that throughout this.
You support lifting the ban on Medicare drug price negotiations and extending
Mhm.
these capabilities to cover all Americans, including uninsured. How do you plan to push for this legislation and ensure that it reduces prescription drug costs for everyone?
Well, see, and the good thing about this is I don't have to invent the wheel. One of the things I've learned during this campaign is that I don't have to propose legislation for everything. Sometimes there's really good legislation that's on the table. So,
Hmm.
and this one's actually really relevant. The Social Security Fairness Act um, does a lot of this prescription drug price reduction, and it's something that the current congressman for the sixth district co-sponsored, Garrett Graves. And
Hmm.
it's one of the key priorities of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is a caucus I've been really fascinated by. Um, I absolutely believe, and ultimately, I believe in a single payer system. I believe in the government making sure that whatever healthcare needs you need access to, that it's there, uh, regardless of your ability to pay. But in lieu of that, I like solutions like the Social Security Fairness Act that make it so that one, you can negotiate. We can negotiate Medicaid prices. We cap the cost of insulin for seniors at $35. I think there are other prescription drug caps and then subsidies that are provided. This is where government can have a positive role in people's lives. And
Hmm.
so I would, if it doesn't pass this Congress, which it probably won't, it's an election year, and by the time you get into the summer, you're unlikely to pass meaningful legislation. I would absolutely not only support the Social Security Fairness Act, but I'd also be willing to be a co-sponsor of it. I think right now it has 320 co-sponsors, which makes you wonder how it hasn't passed. But that would be something where not only would I support that, and I think it addresses some of those concerns, but also I think it shows that I don't approach this from a partisan perspective. That's something that a conservative Republican has led the charge on, but it just makes sense when you look at the legislation and you see what the need is.
Hmm. Education is crucial for our future. What are your plans to secure federal fundings for early childhood education and support higher education systems in Louisiana? In Louisiana.
Yeah, I think in a similar way to the Race to the Top program, I think federal law doesn't have direct control over most education in this country. That is largely controlled by state and local.
Hmm.
But in the same way that technically every state could have a drinking age of 18, but then you give up those federal highway dollars. What you're able to do is use the power of the purse at the federal level to incentivize those changes that you want to see in the education system. And that's traditionally what Congress has done when it's wanted to see change in areas that were more the purview of state and local law. You incentivize it. And so I would utilize the model of the Race to the Top program that Obama used to try to address primary education, secondary education. I try to use that for higher education, early childhood. That money would be available. Usually programs like that, the first 5-10 years, it's 60 to 80% is federally subsidized. But when you can demonstrate the value of it, once those federal subsidies dissipate, usually the states will keep them. Uh, I'd like to do that to make sure that universal pre-K and early childhood development is available for every parent in America. And I think that that's not a luxury. That's not. It is necessary for one, the modern world, but for many families, it is necessary to getting those kids uh, into the educational system, building those skills early so that they have a fighting chance at success in school. And then secondly, I'm a believer that government at this point needs to be able to guarantee you access to a higher education. I think when we made the deal with Americans to guarantee, K through 12, that was at a time where, yeah, high school education could give you a good shot at the American dream, where you can have a car, maybe two, maybe go on vacation, you can buy a house. I'd be lying to you if I told you that a high school education is going to do that for you today.
Right.
And I'd be setting you up for failure. That is not to disparage the people that are thriving and didn't get a college education. They are the exception to the rule. My dad is one of those people. But moving forward, you'd be hard pressed in a global economy to think that you're going to be set up for success if you don't have at least some degree of education that goes beyond high school. And I think that it's incumbent upon government to provide that access. And if state governments aren't embracing that yet, then the federal government should be able to subsidize making sure that access to a public collegiate education, maybe a community college, maybe a trade school, at least a couple years of that is guaranteed, because I think that you need it. And I think that we're lying to folks, we're lying to young people, we're lying to families when we tell them, no, you know what, like that diploma that you got from Glen Oaks, that's good. No, I mean, that diploma that you got from Glen Oaks just says maybe you can read and write, but like the world is bigger and faster and smarter, and you're competing not just with the folks in Alexandria or Opelousas, you're competing with folks in Shanghai and Seoul and Paris. So how do you compete? How do you stack up there? And I think that when we're honest about that, we recognize that a high school education just isn't enough right now.
Right. Affordable housing is a big issue in this district, from Shreveport to Baton Rouge. What initiatives do you advocate for to increase the stock of new affordable housing, affordable single-family housing homes, and multifamily units in various communities? But really, that emphasis on the single-family homes, because that's where the wealth is when you start to begin that process of owning a home.
Yeah, I think probably the most obvious thing is right now access to most of the housing assistance and affordable housing programs is based on like the federal definition of poverty and things like that, being 400% over the poverty line and stuff like that. I think that those need to be adjusted because the rate of inflation, the cost of living, has increased so high and so fast that those numbers are no longer reflective of the actual need. There are people that can make 600% over the poverty line and still can't afford to get a single family home in the community that they live in. So I think the biggest thing right now is adjusting those standards, adjusting those qualifications, because I think that right now, the idea that right now somebody making $50,000 a year, $45,000 a year is struggling in a way that somebody maybe 10 years ago would have struggled at 30,000 or the high 20s. And I think that has to be reflected when we're talking about access to housing. $45,000 a year isn't going to get you what you could have gotten even 5-10 years ago. And I think that our federal requirements for access to help need to reflect the reality that people are experiencing on the ground.
Louisiana roads, bridges, and ports are in dire need of improvements. What are your plans to secure federal funding for these critical infrastructure projects? And I also want to just take it down a little lower to, in a lot of the municipalities, in the rural areas, you still have folk living down the long dirt roads and things of that nature. What realistically would we be looking at in that transportation arena from Anderson as congressman for the 6th District?
Well, I think this one is like kind of old school congressperson, right? Bringing home the bacon so that the federal dollars go to the projects that are most needed. I think some of it is the initiative. So you're right. There are places that have dirt roads as if this is the late 1800s, and so I think there's a certain degree of initiative that has to be done on the part of the congressperson to make sure that you're identifying those areas and you're bringing that investment back. I think that we talked about it before. Congress has increasingly become less about bringing home the bacon, and I get it. Back in the day, it was kind of viewed as a dirty practice. This idea that we're going to pass this bill naming a post office, and there are like 90 other things on there for a bridge that goes there, or for this research center in Iowa.
Mhm.
But the practicality of that was that everybody had a stake in legislation passing, right? Everybody had a stake in getting things done because there was something in it for everybody. Uh,
Mhm.
I think the top priority of a congressperson is to make sure that the federal resources that address your local needs are there.
Mhm.
And so one of I'm taking it old school. One of the main things that I want to be able to deliver are federal dollars for the things that are necessary. That's for the basic things, the blocking and tackling of infrastructure. So that's roads, bridges, uh, highways, things like that, but also for the things that sort of bring us into the 21st century. So that's getting universal broadband out there and getting broadband access to the rural areas, because I don't think that internet is an option anymore. I think that internet is a requirement for you to be able to participate in the global economy.
Mhm.
I think that I think that it takes a proactive approach to it, because you have to know where the need is, even when people aren't asking for it. But it also takes just an approach that when I go to Congress, my biggest job is to bring home as much as I think I can get from the federal government that addresses those local needs.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna go over here to our questions. I still have a couple questions for you, but I want to make sure that the audience there that are listening. One question comes: what will you particularly do for Rapides Parish? They want to make it hyper local. How would you how would, if elected, how would you benefit Rapides Parish?
Well, I think three things, and I also don't want to. This is always the concern. I I also want you to understand how much of your life is impacted by your local government and local politicians, and where it's really a relationship that is often a handoff of, you secure these federal resources, but then the local politicians have to be able to implement it properly and things like that. But I think the first thing is what we were just talking about, making sure that I am both proactive about the areas in Rapides Parish that need investment, but also that I'm listening. What I vowed to everybody is that if elected, there are 10 parishes in this district. We're going to have at least 10 town halls every year, one in each parish, so that those needs are something that you're bringing to me, so that then I can bring them to DC. The second thing, and this has been brought up to me a lot, particularly when I'm okay. Particularly, and I'm looking at the comments as I answer
Oh,
the so that's
okay.
where the pause came from. The second thing is what I have heard from local leaders is that the downtown, particularly in Alexandria, is that's depressing. That you can see the disinvestment, because you can see that the downtown buildings are empty. And so one of the things that I've prioritized is, and I mentioned this earlier, I not only want to see the downtowns revitalized, not just through investment, but by putting local businesses that have the potential, with just access to capital, to become those big time businesses that we're always hoping will move into our downtowns and will revitalize it. I want to make access to capital easier for those small businesses that, but for that access to capital, could scale and could provide uh, and could provide for that economic sort of stimulation. And then the last thing is, and this has been brought up to me by some of the local officials there, is I'd like to address blight, particularly in the Black communities, in Black neighborhoods. Uh, Blight invites, I'm not trying to rhyme, but blight invites a lot of other negative things into our neighborhoods. Not to mention just the eyesore of seeing a house or a property sort of diminish in its appearance, and then in its value, and what it invites in terms of crime and loot and squatters and things like that. But in the Black community, uh, blight is not addressed nearly as quickly or as urgently as it is in other areas. There does seem to be this sense that it's okay for Black neighborhoods to look a little crappy for a while,
No, not for a
regardless of what
while.
happens.
You're being a little too modest there, for decades.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. And I want to make sure, obviously, you don't want to, you want to make sure that whatever family owns that property gets compensated properly. But if you're not going to take care of it, the the negative aspects of it on the neighborhood are too severe for us just to ignore, and they're having a huge impact on not only just sort of people's people's view of their future, but it's having an impact on crime and other things that are happening in the neighborhood. So figuring out some way of utilizing federal policy to address blight more urgently, I think, is a really big deal that has been brought up quite a bit when I've been in Alexandria.
Quentin, this question here, I think, is kind of directed toward us. I understand, but we would like to converse with the state level politicians as well. Ms. Harris, I can emphatically tell you, we have reached out to, our local candidates, the guys that are and the ladies that are running for city council, for police, jury, and various offices. This week, we were focused on the candidates that were running for the 6th Congressional District. But we have reached out, and it's quite a few that for whatever reason they are not responding to the request. So I would encourage you to encourage any of those guys and ladies that are actually running for public office to reach out to the most engaged media outlet in all Central Louisiana, and have them come on and talk about their plans and not be afraid. I mean, this is real. We've seen our communities dwindle down over the last 4 decades, and it's real now. It's time for us to start asking the tough questions, and that's why we're reaching out to the congressional candidates, because we're going to be watching what they do, and we're going to report what they're doing in Congress and different things of that nature. But that's what we always want to do. We want to vote, and we want to also hold our candidates accountable for what they are doing. So if you have a candidate that you are concerned about, we have council person at large that's running here in the city of Alexandria. We have council district number 1 and district 3. Encourage them to reply to our emails and our text messages that we have sent to them. And we would love to have them get them confirmed to come on and talk about their platforms for a better Alexandria.
And and I wanted to point out just one thing that Felicia said, which is that one of the issues in the neighborhoods is that landlords are being slumlords, and that is a top issue. I want to make sure that people are homeowners and property owners. We're not taking property from them and we're not compensating them or something like that. But also, I want homeowners and property owners to be responsible for the properties in those neighborhoods. And if that means having some penalties for letting your property just sort of wallow and diminish, then maybe that's what we have to do. But I want to make sure that these properties are being taken care of, because they do. I'm knocking on doors in these neighborhoods almost every single day. When I do things like this where I got to wear a suit and tie, maybe not as often, but almost every day I'm knocking on doors, and that is, you can see it. You can see it, and in some of the neighborhoods, like the downsides of blight have already manifest. You'll see, half a dozen people that are just kind of living there. You'll see the things that it invites. You'll see the fact that it just brings down the property values of otherwise, lovely neighborhoods, and the communities don't deserve that. And so these property owners need to be held accountable. We need to be fair, but they need to be held accountable for what they're contributing or not contributing to their community.
That's right. We concur with you on that. Damon did chime in, and he said, you saw it. Okay, so you're seeing the comments on your side.
I am, and I appreciate Felicia's enthusiasm as well. She's
Felicia's always out there making sure she keeps us always. She's always keeping us straight out there. So it's all good.
I appreciate that.
Let's see. It was just a couple of other ones there. If we go back over to we talked about the transportation, but the juvenile programs. You mentioned advocating special funding for juvenile prevention and intervention programs. How do you envision these programs helping to reduce crime? If we can dive into it just a little deeper, how do you envision if we start investing in our juveniles out there? How do you see it really helping to reduce that crime, and 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 also I'm gonna hold off on the second part of that question. If you could just go ahead and answer the first part right there.
Yeah, I think, and it's going to sound like a bumper sticker, but it's true. I think it's by giving them an alternative that is more attractive than crime, than making a mistake. Um, Making sure that not only do they have a job, but that it's a job that pays them enough where it's worth it. It's worth it to choose the job over, you know, throwing down in a Walmart parking lot, or, retaliating against some foolishness.
Mhm.
Um, Raising the stakes. So maybe it's a job that allows them to put, food on the table for mama that, they otherwise wouldn't be able to. Maybe it's a job that allows them to take care of a kid. Uh, when you raise the stakes for these young people, it gives them just one more thing to consider before they make a bad decision. And it's, in a lot of ways, it's forcing them to grow up, because it's how we as adults go about life.
Mhm.
The reason why I didn't rob a Chase Bank today was because I have a good job. So I was like, you know what? Maybe not today. I don't want to risk my job. And that's real. We've heard people say, I'm not going to lose my job over this foolishness, and that's a very real thing. Stakes are just a part of life, and I want to give these young people stakes. I want them to have jobs that go beyond being a fry cook at McDonald's, and there's nothing wrong with being a fry cook, but we've already seen that when you're being paid minimum wage or less, that's not incentive enough. And we need folks to feel as if they have a future that's on the line before they make these decisions. So the way that I envision seeing it is that the federal government would make these funds available, and that states and localities would present proposals for how, one, we're going to embed these skills in these young people, and then two, how we're going to directly make sure that these young people are employed, that it's not just a theoretical thing where we train a bunch of young people to cut grass, but none of these young people are actually cutting grass. Like, we need to make sure that not only are they being embedded with these skills, but also we're putting these skills to work and they're making money. A friend of mine in Illinois always says that when young people are getting into trouble, 99% of the time they're just trying to get paid. Well, let's pay them if that's what it takes to be able to reduce the crime rate and put these kids back on track. Is it a long-term solution? No. I mean, you don't want to have to pay people not to commit crime,
Mhm.
but I think that this is a cultural thing for a lot of these kids. They grew up in an environment where it felt desperate. Maybe even their parents were born into an environment where it felt desperate. What I'm talking about is breaking that cycle, giving them something to lose, so that they choose a different path, and then their kids see them choosing that different path. And I think that's how that cycle breaks. But yeah, we got to put these kids to work. We got to put money in their pockets, and we got to raise the stakes so that they choose positivity and a future versus negativity and crime.
In essence, if I see the yin and the yang, and I can choose the one that's really appropriate.
You
You,
would
you
hope
know,
so.
yeah, yeah. When we spoke the last time, Quentin, that was one of the things that you said, and that's the reason why I tried to drill down on that concept, because that's quite a different approach to this thing, And but at the end of the day, we know what we're currently doing is not working, because we see the results of it. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And just on that, I mean, that's the big thing. Is it'd be one thing if doing the old school stuff, like, cut the crime rate in half, but like, it doesn't. It just makes us feel good. That's the only box that it checks. But if
Mhm.
you actually want the crime rate to go down, at some point you have to acknowledge, all right, like, what's the policy that does it? Even if it's not a policy that in a perfect world I would pick. Like, you shouldn't have to incentivize people not to commit crime, but the reality of life is that when people feel desperate, they do desperate things.
Great.
So making policy in the world as it is, and then hoping that we can make the world as it should be. But you make policy in the world as it is.
Mhm. One of the things that we are always talking about over here at Urban Cast is, you know, the lack of adequate recreational activities for young people.
Yep.
Um, especially given our current situation here in Alexandria, for sure. And I would venture to say in the rural area too, because in many situations, Alexandria is considered rural because our population continues to drop a little bit. But how do you plan to secure funding for the renovation and or construction of facilities that are essential to communities for them to thrive? And in some cases, I think back in 20, 30 years ago, a lot of dollars were put into community centers throughout the country. I mean, you go to East Baton Rouge, the North Baton
Hmm.
Rouge Community Center. Here you have Castle
Hmm.
Street Community Center, Shreveport, same thing. But how do we revitalize those? If what's your thoughts about putting these centers back into motion?
Well, I think that the process for securing the funds is no different than the process for securing the funds for a bridge or something like that. But you brought up something that, like a place like Baton Rouge has all sorts of, community centers and parks and stuff like that. But then when you sometimes see how some of those funds were allocated and what those parks look like, they most certainly aren't going to address any social needs. I mean, we have a couple of parks that are just under an overpass and they have a sign next to them, but I wouldn't send my kids there. Broken glass, no lights, things like that. And
Hmm.
yet, some state and federal dollars paid for that. I'd like
Hmm.
to see how much, and I'd like to see what happened with the remainder. I think that's the big thing is it can't just be about having a so-called green space for kids and families to go to. They're like, I need to see the plan for these. I need to see how they are, how are they going to be maintained? What are the other programs that are going to be provided there? That sort of thing. These recreation centers and these city parks are oftentimes hubs of other resources and activity. So I want to see a game plan for how you're going to utilize these funds in this particular community center for improving the community, not just to exist. I
Hmm.
don't just want to see a big old auditorium built with a half maintained basketball court. Like, I want to see things that are enhancing that community, things that are also supplementing and complementing the local educational system. I
Hmm.
want to see how it actually is benefiting the community and not just you know I think that this is what's happening. I'd have to look into it, but I think you say that you're getting funds for a community center or a rec center, you get $1 million, and then you just try to figure out how can I get this thing built for as little as possible, and then nobody's going to look for the rest of the million. And for me, it's like that money is not mine. That money was allocated for this particular purpose, so I want to see all of it utilized to see that potential of that community center, of that rec center. And so I think the biggest difference for me would just be the intention. I want to be a part of those plans. I want to be in those community meetings as we're talking about what that community center is. That way, when I then go and advocate for those federal funds, I'm feeling really confident about what I'm securing. I can't dictate it because at the end of the day, that federal money comes to the local officials. But if I'm part of that planning process, the hope is that they didn't do all of that just as fugazi, just to convince me to get the money. The hope is that we're actually then going to follow through on it. So I intend to be very present when it comes to stuff like that. When we're funding projects where I can be available at inception, I want to be a part of that. That way, my advocacy can also be informed and I can be full throated. It's not, I hope that this bridge goes somewhere. I want it to be. I want to know what I'm getting funds for.
Right, and I think again, this conversation is about you, but I think that legislation ought to definitely include um, results. You
Oh
shouldn't have
yeah,
to at the end of the day, and I think that's what we've not done in the past.
yeah.
Come back and say, hey, what was the follow up? How many kids am I really helping? How many kids are in this center? You know, how are their grades? How are they performing in school and different things of that nature? Those baselines to know that the investments in the community are really working. And I think we need a lot of that. You know.
Well, that's. I mean, if you're a shady politician, that's the benefit of federal money is that you just pass the bill, the money gets allocated, and there is no review process. That money is out the door. Uh, so I do think, yeah, some degree of accountability would be absolutely important because, and I think just Americans are getting tired of this idea of funding projects that actually don't come up with results. I think that if we say we're going to build a rec center, within a year or two, I need to get a result. I need to get an update on what that rec center is doing and what the plans are for the next 5 years.
And the crazy thing about it is you have tons of federal dollars that go through the Department of Labor, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Through the Workforce Investment Acts, the old JTPAs and things of that nature. And you know that there is a requirement for follow-up, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year follow-up to see, how did our monies get spent? I'm pretty sure we can get those better as well. But on the same token, we have a blueprint for putting these type of measures in place.
Yeah, and I think the benefit there is that when the money is going directly through sort of a different institutions, different governmental institutions, those processes are built. But like, for example, when we pass a budget at the federal level, there's no requirement. Yeah, I saw that. No, I think if offered 25 grand, I would decline it. I would not ask for an envelope. But
you saying that happens?
I heard that happens sometimes.
Okay.
But yeah, I think making sure that accountability across the board when you're talking about federal dollars going to local investments is really, really important. It can't just be limited to the few agencies that are really good at it. I certainly think that, especially in our communities, we need to see the results of these investments. And if we're not seeing the results, then we need also to very quickly be able to pivot and figure out what does work.
Okay. Quentin, before I proceed to close, do you have anything you'd like to say to our audience out there, the ones that are listening right now and the ones who's going to come back and listen after we get off?
Well, nothing in particular today. What I'm excited about though is that we just finished filing. Filing was last week, and while for me it's not that big of a deal, I never question whether or not I'd be on the ballot. I know that now is the time where people are starting to pay attention, and people are starting to look at the candidates and contrast the candidates. And what I'd say is, I'm going to continue to be making my case in Central Louisiana. You very well may see me knocking on your door in a cutoff shirt and blue sleeves and blue shorts. But what I want folks to do, especially as now we're sort of in this phase where people are paying more attention and they're judging the candidates, make sure that you're demanding clarity and thoroughness from the candidates, from all the candidates that are running. Make sure that you're judging us on our record. I think that some of the candidates in this race are not very open to scrutiny. And I think it's important in an open race. Nobody's the incumbent here. So we're all asking you for a new job. And I think that requires us to each pay attention, to listen. I've said that word a lot tonight. This is a job. This is a selfless job. It's a selfless job. If I get elected, I'm representing your interests. I'm not representing my interests. I'm representing your interests with, how I think is the best approach to doing it, but it's about you. And so it's so important that the candidates that you're vetting right now during this process are making this process about you. And so I hope that, as you're considering candidates, that you vote for the candidate that you think not only shares your values, but is, I don't know how many people say this a lot, but also is the one that's willing to listen to you the most, because that's what's most important here. So if you don't feel like you're being listened to, if you don't feel heard by other candidates, that's a problem. And I'm trying to prioritize that in this race. Listening.
Listen, I thought about a couple of other questions there, Quentin.
Okay.
The youth vote that's, our Gen Zers and our millennials are the largest voting bloc. And I like to say this repetitively, they control things at this point, so they can make a difference in this election right off the bat. The Republicans introduced a 39-year-old to run as the VP, and we appear now to have some renewed energy. Also over on the Democratic side.
Yeah.
How important, for young people anyway. And right now, typically here in Alexandria, in the Rapides area, our races typically don't kick off until after Labor Day. And here we have you guys, 4 of you guys have agreed to come on and talk to us, and it's like y'all off to this big running race. Are we gonna make some some inroads in actually in putting this coddling, putting the same energy in newer media outlets to make sure we're talking to our young people where they are, as opposed to expecting them to come to where you are. What's the game plan there, man?
That was not where I thought you were going to go with that. I appreciate that.
Okay.
No. I like it. I like it. I think that issue is going to get forced. I was just talking with a sort of a multi-platform media expert at one of the local stations here in Baton Rouge, and he was saying, people no longer, especially post-COVID, most people are getting their information online through various platforms and things like that. And it's not so much, sort of the big three networks locally or, the paper of record anymore. It's from a bunch of different areas. And I think what will force the issue, to be honest with you, is candidates losing because they're reliant on these old school tactics that used to work. And I think the less efficacious they are, the less that they're seeing the results, the less time that candidates who depend wholly on traditional media sources win, the more that they will recognize the value of these new media platforms. For me, mine is out of need, out of necessity, right? Like I need to be able to get my message out to as many people as possible. So the receptiveness to all sorts of platforms is just inherent to my campaign. It'll probably stick with me throughout my career because it's been so important. I think that there are just some politicians who are scared of it because it's so much easier just to go on NBC or your local Fox affiliate or to pay for ads on the local paper. It's easier because there were less choices. Now, not only do you have to kind of pay attention to different platforms, you also have to be able to understand the different messages that each platform is articulating and the interests that each platform represents and why that audience gravitates and trusts that platform. And that's harder. So if you're not a politician that enjoys engaging with voters, if you're not somebody that enjoys kind of the sociology aspect of running for office, I think that this new media landscape is going to scare the hell out of you because there's just so many different channels. It's hard for people to get the right message in those variety of channels if it's not what you're used to. I do think that's an area where younger candidates who have kind of grown up in this landscape have an advantage because it's just kind of par for the course for us. I will say that some of it is still a learning process. I was not a big fan of TikTok before this race. I was not on TikTok really before this race, but like you said, I got to meet voters where they are. Right. And there are a lot of voters on TikTok. So I'm on TikTok.
Absolutely.
Heck, I'm not even lying about this. I'm even thinking about creating an account on Truth Social. I don't know why in the world I would do that. But, there are conservative voters that are turned off by Elbert Guillory or want something new. And I want to make sure that, they know that I'm in the race as well. So it's a real consideration. How do you meet voters where they are?
Right.
And it's probably a reflection. It all probably reflects also in the way that you retail campaign. If you're not willing to kind of go beyond a handful of places or venues, you probably don't diversify your message when it comes to the airwaves either. I think you have to just be willing to go with the flow, and the way we communicate with people is different now. So you just have to embrace that.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, Quentin, I definitely want to say thank you for joining us today and sharing your vision for the 6th Congressional District. We appreciate your insight and dedication to our community. That's from Shreveport to Alexandria, down to Baton Rouge, and over to Opelousas and Shreveport and Marksville and everything in between.
All of that.
All of it. To our viewers, I definitely want to say thank you for tuning in tonight. And for those that are going to come on and watch it after the fact, we definitely want to say thank you. Remember, your vote is your voice out there. So make sure you get out and go vote. And if you're here in the state of Louisiana, www.govote, that's the French pronunciation.com. is where you go register to vote at. We also want to extend a special thank you to our advertisers, Math Makes Sense, National Auto and Tire, Sattler's Tow, and Long's Preferred Products. Your support makes shows like this possible. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed. I think we got all those questions out there from Miss Harris. I think we got them. So I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. Quentin, if you could just hang tight 1 second.
All right.
All right.